Hey guys. Tonight we'll start with something very relevant. Sleep, or more precisely, how people slept in the Middle Ages, is far stranger than most of us imagine. So before you feel comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video. But only if you really enjoy what I'm doing here. Please tell me in the comments where and when you watch it. It's always fascinating to see people from all over the world join us. Now, dim the lights or turn on the fan to emit a soft background hum. Let's start tonight's journey together with ease. Before the advent of electricity, dewy and under the influence of sleep hygiene, the nighttime routine of medieval people puzzled modern melatonin and enthusiasts is called segmented sleep, a natural to minus part sleep cycle that is neatly divided into two halves like stale medieval cookies. The program is very simple. After the sun sets, most people go to bed early and doze off into what is called their first sleep. Then, about 4 hours later, they will deliberately wake up and do some multitasking that can only be described as medieval midnight in the next 1 or 2 hours. This is not insomnia. This is the function of sleep. The observation time between two sleeps is considered practical and useful. But occasionally, there are also worrying social activities. People use this time to pray, read religious texts, make fires or check their livestock, because nothing disrupts your REM cycle more than outing whether your goat is still in the yard. Yes, this is also regarded as an ideal time for intimate relationships. Medieval doctors and marriage manuals pointed out that during this period, the body had a good rest and the spirit was very calm. This sounds like a polite way of saying that one was too tired and did not want to quarrel. So if you've ever thought that getting up early to make coffee for your partner is romantic, then you should know that the standards set by your ancestors are completely different from yours. The second sleep occurs after this interval and lasts until sunrise. From monks to farmers, everyone participated in this night rhythm. Even literary figures like Joe Sell casually mentioned it. This means that even in medieval literary works, people were writing about the problem of poor sleep. Strangely enough, modern science indicates that segmented sleep may actually be more natural for humans. These two sleep cycles are in line with how our circadian rhythm works in the absence of artificial light. So the next time you find yourself fully awake at 2 o'clock in the morning, don't panic. Just whisper, "Ah, yes, the vigil has begun." Go and look after a symbolic fireplace. It was not until the industrial age, with the emergence of factories, gas lamps and the growing fear of low productivity, that humans began to enforce the idea of 8 hours of undisturbed sleep, as if sleep were a regular exercise. In the Middle Ages, waking up in the middle of the night did not mean failure. This is the schedule. Whether you like it or not, everyone has to attend. Let's talk about beds, or medieval beds. In today's world, we are obsessed with yarn count, memory foam, cooling gel, and whether mattresses are like clouds. In medieval Europe, beds were usually just a pile of things that had once been alive, now being flattened under the weight of lack of sleep and unspoken regrets. A typical farmer's bed consists of a straw mattress called a mattress. This is actually stuffing straw or hay into a rough fabric bag if they have one. If not, it's just the straw on the floor, which might be dampened, might have already been claimed by the cat. These trays are uncomfortable, but they are still better than nothing. This is another option. Straw is cheap, abundant and can keep warm very well. It is also very good at hiding insects, lice and the occasional field mice, which makes it necessary to be very careful to keep quiet when sleeping and exercising. If it itches, just ignore it. If it bites someone, just move a little and expect the best outcome. If a family has more money, or at least a fully functional back, they might lift the straw mattress onto a wooden frame. This did not significantly change the sleep experience, but it did slightly reduce the chance of waking up with beetles in the ears. Linen is a rare enjoyment. Most people sleep in the clothes they wear all day. Back then, there were no pajamas at all and no private space either. The entire family, children, parents, and perhaps grandparents, all sleep in the same place, sometimes on the same piled straw. If you're too hot, you can always roll onto your cousin's elbow. Of course, nobles have suitable beds. A large wooden frame, a down mattress, embroidered bed sheets, and a canopy to prevent through drafts. Helpfully, there are still lice. These beds are so precious that they have been passed down from generation to generation in their wills. You didn't inherit the land. You inherited Aunt Matilda's uneven feather bed. However, for most people in the Middle Ages, the bed was not a comfortable place. This is a place where you won't freeze, where you can avoid chickens. Maybe, just maybe, you can dream of one day becoming rich enough to sleep on something that doesn't creak or rustle. Today, when we hear nightcap, what comes to mind is a cozy little drink. Perhaps it was the whiskey, the warm fire, and a suspicious decision. But in the Middle Ages, a eintint was not a kind of drink. That's a hat. A real, tangible fabric that often looks rather ridiculous, used to prevent your head from freezing while you sleep. You see, heat insulation was not a strong suit of medieval architecture. Stone walls, drafty thatched roofs, and windows made of thin animal horns or old parchment could not keep out the cold. The central heating system is called a dog. So in order to keep their heads warm at night, especially since the body's heat dissipates the fastest through the scalp, people in the Middle Ages used simple nightcaps. These hats come in various shapes and sizes, but the most representative version is long and pointed, just like what a part-down chimney-sweeping wizard would look like. They are usually made of wool, linen, or anything that can keep warm without irritating the goats at home. For men, it is a practical accessory. For women, it sometimes also serves as a Jewish headscarf or a headscarf, which has a dual function. It can maintain dignity while covering hair that has not seen soap since last Lent. In addition to keeping warm, the eintint also has social significance. In some areas, married women are required to wear headscarves all the time. Yes, even when sleeping. The hat itself can be embroidered or dyed to reflect a family's wealth or status. Because nothing can better indicate success than sleeping with a small national flag on one's head. In more urban settings, night hats have even become a symbol of get it off work. If you open the door in one piece of clothing, it is a polite way in the Middle Ages, meaning I'm not wearing it for conversation. Yes, this hat does mean walking away. Of course, night hats are usually paired with night shirts, which are essentially long and loose corset outerwear. Imagine Ebenezer Scrooge, free from the moral lessons that linger in your mind. Pajamas are not sexy, but they are very practical, itchy, and sometimes flammable. Nowadays, the idea of sleeping next to a stranger is often unlimited to night flights, overly ambitious camping trips, or the occasional strange, at the NB confusion, that in medieval Europe, this was completely normal and there was nothing dispensable at all. Suppose you are a traveling merchant, a pilgrim, or simply someone who gave up his mule on the way to Norwich. You find a hotel, which in itself is a rare luxury. You ask to find a place to sleep. What you get is not a room or a bed, nor even a particularly clean floor. What you got was a seat on a bed that was already occupied. Compared with modern hotels, medieval hotels were, or like human bunk rooms. Privacy is unexpected. If there is space on the bed, you usually sleep with complete strangers who may snore, talk in their sleep, or have many suspicious boils. This is not regarded as impolite. This is merely an effective utilization of resources. Depending on the size and social tolerance, each bed can accommodate 2, 3, or even for travelers. In larger cities, you might live in a hall that resembles a dormitory, with rows of beds and no personal space at all. There is no referee in snoring competition. The competition for the elbow territory is extremely fierce. Sometimes men and women part ways, but this is not always the case. Some hospitals attempt to allocate beds by profession. Blacksmiths and blacksmiths, priests and priests. It is said that thieves and thieves, but usually it spreads first. For though it sounds like a nightmare to modern people with bacteriophobia, at that time it was an escalation of sleeping outdoors with wolves, rain, and the occasional peasant uprisings. Worried about being stolen, many travelers tie their wallets to their belts or hide them in their clothes when they sleep. Others slept on their luggage, turning it into pillows and alarm systems. If someone touches your bed, it usually means that you will wake up poorer. Of course, the rich did not suffer such a fate. The nobles set out with their entourage and camped in relatively comfortable places. If the innkeeper valued their rooftops, they would ask for their own rooms. In the medieval world, going to bed was not merely about covering oneself with a blanket and then falling asleep. This is a spiritual action, a night gamble with your eternal soul as the stake. People are not just sleeping, they are also preparing for death. Therefore, bedtime prayer is very popular. Forget about lavender spray or the calming podcast. In the Middle Ages, sleep was relaxed in confessions, hymns and spiritual provisions for purifying the soul, in case they died between good night and dawn. This idea is very simple. You could die at any time from illness, fire, or demons. The most dangerous thing is to be over 30 years old in 1247. So you'd better pray, not because it brings comfort, but because hell is terrifying, and you don't want to come uninvited, not washed clean, and mentally in a mess. The common saying is that if I die before I wake up, I pray to God to take my soul away. Sweet, right? Apart from the fact that it is basically a legal document written by a 7-year-old child acknowledging death as a possible bedtime outcome, many adults have a whole set of prayers for different threats. When you feel guilty, when you think the devil might be hiding in the rafters, one is used to prevent the plague. But unfortunately, it ages very poorly. Some people even pray to specific saints, who are famous for guarding sleepers. It's a bit like a sacred bodyguard guarding your soul at the club entrance. Truly devout monks, nuns and overly anxious nobles ended their day with complaints, which was the last prayer ceremony before going to bed. After complaining, they vowed to keep silent. This was not difficult because everyone was exhausted, hungry and a little afraid of the dark. Children are also encouraged to pray. On the one hand, it is because it is good for their souls. On the other hand, it gives them something to do instead of asking why the dog was on their bed again. Parents remind them that there are angels watching, which sounds very cute until you realize that this is not a guardian angel, but a celestial surveillance system. In short, bedtime prayer is not for peace, but for controlling harm at the last moment. Imagine it as antivirus software from the Middle Ages. You hope it will work, even if you don't fully understand how it works. In modern society, dreams are often regarded as nonsense. Stress too much cheese, or your brain trying to archive files in the dark. But in the medieval world, dreams were very serious, just as serious as in the eternal consequences. Dreams are more than just dreams. They are believed to come from God, saints, devils, your guardian angels, or perhaps the strange relic you kissed last Sunday. Some dreams are revelations from God, while some are temptations from the devil. In any case, you should be aware that you might write it down, repent, or fast for 3 days for safety reasons. Theologians, monks and those who claim to be far-sighted spent a great deal of time interpreting dreams. The entire text is dedicated to decoding them. Aiming of fire might indicate hell. Dreaming of water indicates either purification or drowning. If you dream of a sheep and a man playing with fish, it's best to find a priest immediately and move house. People in the Middle Ages believed that what happened in dreams was very important, because your soul remained active even when you were sleeping. This means that your behavior in the dream might reveal hidden sins or mental weaknesses. That somewhat awkward dream about stealing bread. This might be your subconscious acknowledging your guilt for overeating or simply hunger in the real world. However, it's best to be honest just in case. Monks and nuns often record their dreams and share them with spiritual mentors. Some people are celebrated for seeing sacred visions while sleeping. Others were quietly told to eat less onions before going to bed. Of course, dreams are not merely spiritual puzzles. They also created excellent plot installations. Medieval literature was replete with dreams of knights encountering angels, demons or metaphorical creatures, which sang the praises of virtues at length. Dreams are basically the Netflix of the medieval world, except for more fables and fewer happy endings. It can be imagined that the church is skeptical about this. Not all dreams are sacred. Some are believed to be implanted by demons to corrupt innocent people. If you dream of something unhealthy, it might mean that your soul is under attack, or you are just sleeping too close to the fireplace. In modern times, some people let their pets sleep in beds. This is a comfortable arrangement, although there may be an occasional stench. However, in the Middle Ages, Sharing a bed with animals was not a strange personal choice. This is a heating strategy. Let's start from the basics. Medieval houses were not built for comfort. Stone walls, without insulation, with strong winds, they might have names. Central heating is known as home, pig farming. In farmers' homes, it is not uncommon for people at livestock to sleep in the same room, sometimes on the same bed, and usually on the same pile of straw. The chicken is wandering freely. The dog is curled up at your feet. The pig was snorting softly by the stove. If you're lucky enough, they won't bite you at night either. This has nothing to do with emotions, although people in the Middle Ages did appreciate their animals very much. This is about survival. Animals generate body heat. They are warm and reliable, and unlike some relatives, they don't take over the blanket. A big dog can prevent your toes from freezing. A cow in the corner might raise the indoor temperature by 1 or 2 degrees, which feels like a miracle in January. In medieval families, especially those of the lower classes, there was usually only one room for storing everything: cooking, eating, sleeping, and occasionally the dead. Everyone, whether human or animal, muddles through life in the same space. Children might snuggle up between their parents and goats. A chicken can serve as a temporary alarm clock. Hygiene. Let's not ask too many questions. This situation is not common for wealthier families. Nobles usually did not sleep with livestock, even though there might be pugs on their beds. Not for warmth, but for fashion and the redistribution of fleas. Some castles even set up separate sleeping areas for their favorite animals, because nothing is more powerful than obs having their own rooms and titles. Of course, there are also disadvantages. Animals can be very loud. They can wander around. Historically, they were not known for respecting personal space, but people in the Middle Ages adapted. I was kicked at 3 in the morning. This is just part of the routine before going to bed. If you have ever shared a room with someone else in a youth hostel and thought, this is a bit too much, please allow us to introduce the medieval monastery cemetery, a place where one dies peacefully under silent oaths. The monastery does not believe in private space, nor does it believe in tenderness and pleasure. In a typical cemetery, there are dozens of monks, all sleeping in a large room, usually neatly lined up in a row, just like morally upright sardines. A bed, if you can call it a bed, is usually made of wood. Sometimes, if the owner feels very generous or on a feast day, there will be a strong mattress. You sleep in your clothes not out of modesty, but because getting dressed in the dark to unlock in the morning to pray is far more painful than going to bed ready. The uniforms of the monastery, including the robes, belts and sandals, were both spiritual armor and poo-insulating materials. If you feel cold, you will stratify. If you get hot, no, you don't. There's no pillow, no privacy curtain, and absolutely no talking. Under the reign of Saint Benedict, silence was compulsory rather than recommended. If you turn over and moan too loudly, you might find yourself in a night court for a week. However, snoring is a grey area. You can't control it, but if it becomes destructive, God might still hold you accountable. Or at least your cellmates will. The lighting was very simple. A candle, please. You don't need to see. You just need to lie still and not commit any crime. This is our goal. Despite leading a simple life, the monks believed that their Spartan beds were a preparation for the afterlife. Prepare for the journey of the soul and reject any excess of the body. Sleeping is not a pleasure. This is necessary and is monitored and arranged, just like any other matter. Some monks even sleep sitting down, just to avoid any hints of luxury, dreams, or cycles. In contrast, farmers' haste acts and snoring pigs seem almost extravagant. At least that pig didn't comment on you. Let's talk about the things that would scare most modern sleepers. I voluntarily got up at 2 o'clock in the morning, not to go to the toilet, nor to look at the scroll of bad luck, but to pray. Loud, cold, candle-lit prayers. This was the standard practice in medieval monasteries. Monks and nuns follow a strict daily schedule, which is based on standardized times and includes mattresses, the first service of the day. During the day, which we refer to, is the darkest time of the night. Even owls are deciding whether to wake up or not. The death knell would ring, usually by the person who drew the short draw. The souls in the entire tomb, dressed in long robes and lacking sleep, would silently drag their feet towards the church. Yes, they were still dressed in full clothes because the monks did not wear pajamas. The only hierarchical system they believe in is at the spiritual level. In the chapel under the flickering candlelight and the echo of the stone vault, they chanted hymns and recited scriptures, trying not to fall asleep standing up. By the way, this is a real problem. Records show that monks who doze off during prayer are punished, usually with additional household chores or more prayers. You fell asleep in your raincoat. Congratulations. You can now lead the next one. Mattresses can last for an hour or longer. Some particularly enthusiastic orders extended it to 2. Imagine that when your stomach reminds you that dinner is a bowl of lentils and a moral lesson, your body is actively shutting down. After the ceremony, the monks either returned to bed for a second sleep or, under stricter orders, directly entered into study or physical labor. For there was no more sacred discipline than harvesting wheat during a 4-hour fragmented break. Why so early? This idea is to sacrifice comfort and offer the first and quietest part of the night to God, free from the temptation of sunlight, warmth or the REM cycle. It is a powerful symbol of piety, or at least when you recover from numb feet, the smoke of candles, and the out-minus of minest and singing of the Ambrose brothers. In modern society, sleeping alone is often regarded as a luxury, a symbol of independence and peace, or simply an ability to control the blanket. However, in the Middle Ages, sleeping alone was regarded as suspicious, impractical, or completely unsafe. Let's start from the basics. Warmth. The bed, as we said, is not entirely warm. The stone walls and open chimneys did not provide much insulation, and central heating still needed several plagues. So, people share a bed to keep warm, not out of close relationships, but out of the basic despair of war. Children sleep with their siblings and parents. If neighbors come to visit, sometimes they also sleep with the children of the neighbors. It's like spending the night at a friend's house, but no one asks you if you want to go. But apart from the warmth, there is another mental reason for sleeping together. Many people think that night is when the devil works overtime. Alone in the darkness, your soul is easily tempted, or even worse, possessed. Having others around creates a moral buffer zone. If anything goes wrong, at least someone will witness it, or catch the devil first. It is almost unimaginable for children to be alone at night, not only for comfort, but also because ghosts, fairies and wandering souls are all part of the night scene. Legend warns people not to sleep alone, as it can bring pranks and mental dangers. Unlike today's bedtime stories, these stories do not end with hugs. They all went missing in the end. Even married couples often share a bed with children, servants, or random guests. Privacy is more of a modern myth than a concept. In fact, the idea of two people sleeping alone on a large bed is so unfamiliar that it would be regarded as a waste or extremely suspicious. Even monks often sleep together in a religious context. If someone is assigned to sleep alone, it is usually for disciplinary reasons. Yes, in some cases, lying alone in bed is simply a punishment. The logic of the Middle Ages was that solitary sleep gave the opportunity for crime. Collective sleep, public responsibility. Next time when you curl up in your own bed, cover yourself with your own blanket, and enjoy the silence in a room free of the smell of mutton. In the Middle Ages, you might have had 2 children, a sheepdog and a cousin with you, and they were all snoring. If you have ever accidentally fallen asleep while sitting in a speech, a carriage or a waiting room for a dentist, you might wake up with a twitching neck and deep remorse. But in the Middle Ages, upright sleep was not an accident. This is a way of life. Some people in the Middle Ages, especially the wealthy and devout believers, would choose to sleep on their backs rather than lie flat. Why? There are several reasons, and none of them is particularly relaxing. First of all, there is a medical view that lying flat is not conducive to digestion. The lungs are the overall balance of body fluids. In a world where a doctor believes that a sneeze can rearrange your soul, this logic makes perfect sense. They believe that sleeping upright helps prevent brain congestion, which may sound inauspicious, but mainly means not drowning in your own skin. The second concern is the mental aspect. Lying flat is considered too close to the posture of the deceased. You don't want to confuse God, or even worse, you don't want to sleep in the same position at a funeral and draw the attention of the angel of death. Is it superstition? Absolutely. However, when your local pastor also serves as the community's health advisor, you will carefully choose your Bethel. Therefore, when people sleep, they often lie half stilted, supported by large cushions, pillows, or wooden headboards equivalent to those of the lazy boys in the Middle Ages. Sometimes, the nobles would install inclined brackets on their beds to maintain a semi-sitting position, which was very suitable for digesting meat pies at night or defending against sudden attacks from demons. Monks went even further, under more stringent requirements. They might even sit up straight on the bench or lean against the cold wall to sleep, only wearing hoods to suppress discomfort. This has nothing to do with health. This is about discipline. If you feel too comfortable, you might dream. If you dream, you might commit a crime. If you have committed a crime, you are welcome to come and repent at 5 in the morning. Needless to say, this has nothing to do with high-quality rest. It is about virtue, discomfort, slightly confusing theology. Forget the nightmares and the goblins under the bed. For people in the Middle Ages, the real monster of the night was already hiding in the bed sheet, small, stubborn, and completely uninterested in your prayers. Of course, we are talking about fleas. Lice, the unofficial mascot of medieval bedrooms minus bedbugs. Let's stop whitewash it. Hygiene was not a strong suit of medieval Europe. Bathing is rare, laundry is expensive, and soap is sometimes made from substances that are best left unnamed. Add a strong filled mattress, shared bedding, and occasional live chickens under your feet, and you'll have a perfect environment to enjoy a pest buffet. Fleas and lice are very common and they're almost roommates. Farmers deal with them every day. The nobles, even though they had satin sheets and feather beds, were not spared. In fact, some wealthy families have their own picky eaters. A true servant is responsible for removing lice from the employer's errand clothes. Imagine this is your job title, Royal Scoutmaster. Meanwhile, bedbugs were the silent killers of sleep in the Middle Ages. They hide in the frames of wooden beds, in the crevices of mattresses, and even in the cracks of stone walls. At night, they show up like little vampires and enjoy themselves to the fullest. If you want to know why people in the Middle Ages wore nightcaps and clothes while sleeping, it wasn't always for warmth. Sometimes it's insect-proof armor. The range of solutions varies from slightly effective to impressively crazy. Some families burn strongly scented herbs like wormwood or licorice to repel insects. Some people put garlic, onions, or even ashes on their beds. This may not be of much help to pests, but it will surely minimize the romance. This is not merely physical discomfort. Fleas are often regarded as a symbol of evil or moral impurity, reminding people of human degeneration and poor bedding. The whole poem is about fleas. Some are preaching, some are airy romance, because nothing can express my love for you better than let's unite like the fleas that bite us. So, while modern people's sleep is interrupted by buzzing phones and street lamps, medieval sleep is more likely to be disturbed by scratching, twitching, and the subtle feeling of something crawling on your calves. Because that's indeed the case. We all have had sleepless nights. But have you ever tried to fall asleep wearing a 100-pound iron block? No, in the Middle Ages, some people did this, for it was obvious that nothing could better describe the beautiful dream than preparing for a martial arts match while asleep. It should be noted that most people, even knights, do not often sleep in armor. The weather is hot, heavy, and noisy. Trying to roll over in a set of chainmail is a bit like trying to doze off in a bag of tableware. However, during wartime or in hostile areas, sleeping in half armor is regarded as a safer option. Comfortable optional, survival, highly recommended. In a knight's battle, he might only take off his helmet and handers, keeping his mail shirt or breastplate in case the enemy decides to hold a surprise party at midnight. There is nothing better than waking up to the sound of hooves and getting dressed, while still half asleep and half awake thinking about turnips. In besieged castles, soldiers would even sleep with swords or axes, just like some very aggressive bedtime safety blankets. The shield also serves as a pillar. If the enemy breaks through the city wall, at least you won't have to wear clothes. Priority. Of course, sleeping in armor cannot fully restore one's physical strength. Iron is impermeable, and chainmail has the bad habit of squeezing the skin. Coupled with the cold stone floor, the fewest bedding, and the snoring of your companions and the crackling of torches, your sleeping environment is even less comfortable than that of an airport terminal. Even those who did not take part in the battle sometimes wore light protective gear when sleeping in dangerous areas. Traveling merchants or on duty guard might sleep in thick cotton padded jackets, which offer a bit of protection and more spiritual support than mere prayer. Don't forget, the armor isn't that fine either. If you turn over in the wrong way, you might make too loud a jingling sound, waking others up and making them think the end of the world has come again. In an era when demons, licensed pigs plagued your bed at night, you might think that sleepwalking was just an inconvenience of the Middle Ages. But oh no, it's much more dramatic than that. In the Middle Ages, if you started wandering around in your sleep, people wouldn't attribute it to stress or fatigue. They think you are possessed, enchanted, or have an unfinished deal with the Holy Roman Empire. If you want to make a deep impression on the local monks, sleepwalking or night walking is not understood and is often terrifying. The idea that someone could stand up from the straw shed, drag their feet across the room, and stare blankly at the wall is not so much a harmless nightmare as a devil's rehearsal dinner. Judging from the records at that time, people were really frightened by sleepwalkers. Imagine such a picture. A man in a long gown, holding a candle in his hand, had a vacant look in his eyes. While stepping on livestock, he murmured Latin, a language he had never spoken before. You might think it's a ghost or a heretic, or both. According to the local priest, the exorcism ceremony might be scheduled before breakfast. Some people believe that sleepwalking is caused by bad humor, especially an excessive amount of black bile, which is a general term for all the things they couldn't explain in the Middle Ages. Others believe that this is because the soul is temporarily released during sleep, allowing the body to move freely, like an unattended mule. To prevent these night-time adventures, people have tried various methods, ranging from herbs to praying in bed, hanging iron talismans, or in more rural areas, simply tying people's legs to chairs. If this sounds extreme, think of some medieval families with open fireplaces, knives everywhere, and night pots waiting to be tragically overturned. In a strange twist, there was a rumor that people climbed onto the roof while sleeping. Whether these descriptions are exaggerated or not, the fear of the dreamer's jump has led to the window being locked, and occasionally has also sparked theological debates on whether a person would commit a crime unconsciously. Fortunately, most sleepwalkers are just pacing, muttering to themselves, or trying to open the imagined door. And if someone sleepwalks into a church, the locals might regard it as a sacred sign or demand a purification ceremony to cover all the spiritual foundations. If the life in the Middle Ages taught people anything, it was how to fall asleep peacefully in chaos. The church bells, thunderstorms, screaming livestock, and occasional sieges. For the sleep-minus deprived residents in the Middle Ages, these were just environmental noises. Medieval version of white noise. Let's start with the bell. The church bells mark every sacred moment of the day. Sunrise, prayer time, mealtime, and of course the bad moments at 2 or 3. And if you live near a monastery, your dreams may be tracked by the regular death knell. To some extent, the brain accepted it. The chimes became a lullaby for an overloaded soul. And it's not just bells. The storms are frequent and terrifying. Without weather forecast software or triple-pane windows, you experienced every clap of thunder as if the end of the world was approaching. The roof was leaking, the windows were reeking, and the chimney was howling like a banshee. However, people still fell asleep. They had to do so. Work did not stop because of insomnia. Farming, praying, and avoiding the Vikings were the same. Speaking of this, invasions and doomsday events do not always affect sleep time. In the 14th century, despite famine, war and even the rampant Black Death, people still fell asleep somehow. When the car of death passes by in the morning, it is regarded as a terrifying alarm rather than a cause of panic. If you don't wake up, some people think it's a kind of kindness. There are even records showing that people slept during earthquakes, barn fires and dengue, NOBS. Lack of sleep is very common and the body is also adjusting. If you work from morning till night, eat just enough to make ends meet, and spend all day avoiding nud, taxes and mental curses, you will sleep very soundly. Some people still regard sleep as an escape hatch. Facing illness, sadness, or the fear of the end of the world, some people simply curl up under their cloaks, mumble prayers, and then take a nap. This is almost predicted every century. There is a strange kind of wisdom in this. In the winter of 1692, the village of Salem in Massachusetts was covered with heavy snow. It was overshadowed by tension, doubt and a calm fear that seeped into the wooden houses and the frozen fields. The people of Salem were Puritans. They were strict, devout and very superstitious. They believe that they are building a sacred community in the wilderness, a city on the mountain, under the watch of God and followed by Satan. Life is already very hard. This village has recently split from Salem town on political and religious issues. The crops failed. Smallpox raged in the nearby community. The war with indigenous tribes left many people with trauma. There are frictions among neighbors, inheritance disputes, and deep resentment towards outsiders or anyone who is not quite adapted. Coupled with the long, dark and harsh winter in New England, something was doomed to break. This breakthrough occurred at the home of the chaplain Samuel Parris, who was the village chaplain. His 9-year-old daughter, Attie, and 11-year-old niece Abigail Williams, began to behave strangely. They screamed uncontrollably. They threw things. They distort their bodies in an unnatural way. Sometimes they would remain silent, their eyes wide open in fear. The neighbors whispered that they were cursed. The girls claimed that they were bitten by an invisible force. Pastor Parris didn't know what to do, so he invited the local doctor, William Griggs. After finding no physical cause, Riggs made a diagnosis, which would throw the entire village into chaos. Witchcraft. This sentence ignited the fear that Salem had been brewing. In a place where witches are regarded as real and dangerous servants of the devil, this idea is not far-fetched. Now, if the devil could break into the pastor's own home, what would it mean for the rest of the community? Stimulated by adults and their companions, the girls began to call out their names. First of all, they accused women who were on the fringes of society, out of place in society and abandoned by society. But soon, these accusations spread to those of fame, the rich, and even the devout. Salem is a small village, but what is about to happen will have a profound impact. At first, the whispers in the darkness soon turned into the cries on the G-enables and the paranoid legacy that still lingers in American history books to this day. After the idea of witchcraft took root and sprouted in Salem, it spread like ivy. At first it was quiet, but then it would strangle everything it touched. The tortured girls, Betty Parris, Abigail Williams, and others not long after, such as Putnam Jr. and Mercy Lewis, seemed to be getting braver day by day. They convulsed in court, screamed in prayer, and claimed that they could see dark souls hovering over some villages. This is not merely a childhood imagination. This is a dramatic, public and disturbingly believed belief. The first to be blamed are those who have received the least protection, those women who are already living on the fringes of society. Sarah Good is a homeless beggar. When she is driven out of the door, she talks to herself. People claimed that her uttering was a curse. She was smoking a pipe. She scolded the children sternly. She meets the standards of a witch because she doesn't meet the standards of a Puritan woman. Sarah Osborne hasn't been to church for over a year. After the death of her first husband, she married her indentured servant, which shocked the community. A woman who rebels against tradition is obviously suspicious. Tituba was a female slave in Pastor Parris's household, and she was the most peculiar one among them. She is from Barbados. Her stories, accent and folk tales have frightened the villagers. Under pressure, and perhaps even physical assault, to 2BA admitted to witchcraft. But her confession not only failed to clear up the misunderstanding, but also messed things up. She told a story about a tall man in black related to the devil, who asked her to sign a book. She said she saw strange animals, yellow birds, red cats and even ghost dogs. But the most fatal thing was that she claimed there were other witches in Salem. This is what the court needs to hear. As soon as Tata BA opened the door, the others rushed in. New names are added every week. Neighbors attack each other. The grudges of the past were disguised as accusations of justice. The property dispute escalated into a terrorist attack. If someone's cow suddenly dies, it must be witchcraft. If a baby cries while praying, it must be the devil's doing. Fear has become so contagious that even innocent people dare not speak out, defending an accused, which is no different from inviting suspicion from others. Silence is safety. In this way, the web of accusations expanded, trapping the village in a sticky, invisible thread. Logic is in decline. Hysteria is now under control. As the accusations grew more and more numerous, the villagers' emotions reached a fanatical level and the colonial government intervened. The newly appointed governor, William Phipps, was eager to maintain order and established a special court to deal with the chaos. It is called the Orient in a court, derived from French. It means to listen and decide, but it truly turned into a factory of justice driven by fear. In June 1692, the court was held in Salem, which was no ordinary court. Its rules were distorted by panic. It doesn't require conclusive evidence or reliable witnesses, but allows for something more dangerous, such as ghost evidence. Ghost evidence refers to the testimony that the defendant's soul or ghost has tortured the victim. In other words, if someone claims to have seen your ghostly strangling them in a dream, this is acceptable in court. Whether the defendant might be sleeping in a church or several miles away, it is their souls that are doing the devil's work. You can't question a dream. What's worse, you can't refute it. Children are now regarded as the main witnesses. Their convulsions, screams and gasps in the courtroom became more and more dramatic day by day. A girl named Mary Walcott would suddenly lose her temper whenever someone suspected of being a witch entered her room. If the prisoner looked at her, she would scream. If they didn't look at her, she would scream even louder. These performances were fascinating, and judges, including influential Judge Samuel C.W. Allen Chief Justice William Stoughton, accepted all of this. There is no defense lawyer there. This concept did not exist in colonial trials. If you are accused, you are fighting alone. If you deny these accusations, those tortured girls will struggle in pain. If you confess, you may be spared death, but only if you name someone else. This system rewards lies and punishes science. Worse still, the trial became a public spectacle. People came from nearby towns to watch. The defendant was paraded through the streets in shackles, often at a loss, often in poverty and almost always powerless. However, not everyone believes it. Some people in the town said privately that these girls were pretending. Others question why only certain types of people have been charged, but few have spoken out publicly. Questioning the court means questioning God's will. In Salem, reason has taken a back seat, and law has become a mirror reflecting fear rather than justice. On June 10, 1692, the G Aloud in Salem welcomed its first victim, Bridget Bishop. She is no stranger to scandals. Her reputation makes her an easy target of attack. She is dressed in bright red and runs a tavern. A few years ago, she was accused of using witchcraft. In her trial, the neighbors testified that her soul strangled them at night. The children died after she passed by, and she still kept enchanted doll. She denied everything. Nevertheless, the court still found her guilty. She was taken to Gallows Hill, a desolate and tempest land outside Salem. Without prayer, there is no mercy. The rope has been pulled. The crowd watched intently. With this execution, the death machine began to spin. The subsequent hanging followed one after another. On July 19th, another 5 women were executed. Sarah Good, Susanna Martin, Rebecca Oz, Elizabeth Howe and Sarah Wilds. Some people have a very good position in the church. Rebecca Nas's situation is particularly shocking. A devout old woman, deeply loved by the community. Even the jury initially found her innocent. However, under the pressure from the court and the victimized girl, the verdict was overturned. A nurse's last words spread through the air like a warning. "I am as innocent as an unborn child." But this is not important. The noose has no discrimination. In August, more people were executed. September 22nd was the deadliest day, with 8 people being hanged in just one morning. Among them were Arthur Curry and her husband Giles Corey. The former was skeptical about the experiment at the beginning, while the latter met a different fate. Giles refused to plead guilty. The court was unable to conduct a trial without a judge, so it resorted to an ancient English punishment, pain forte d'or. He was driven to death. The stone was slowly piled up on his chest for 3 whole days. According to legend, his last words were even more weighty. By the end of the hysteria, 19 people had been hanged, 1 had been crushed to death, and at least 5 others were still in prison awaiting trial. Dozens of people lied to save their lives. More than 200 people have been charged. The gallows cast a long shadow over Salem, not only on the mountain, but also in everyone's heart. Fear turned into law. Justice was blindfolded and sent to the guillotine. When executions became the focus of public attention, hundreds of people were still sitting in cramped and stinking prisons, waiting for a verdict or a miracle to occur. The small prison in Salem couldn't accommodate all of them. The accused witches were imprisoned in neighboring towns such as Ipsos, Switch and Boston, locked to walls, starving, freezing and then forgotten. Most of the defendants were not witches, nor even exiles. They are neighbors, friends, parents and children. Their only crime is to quarrel with those they shouldn't or to own the land that others want. In many cases, personal grudges disguise themselves as sacred justice to draft charges. A pig slipped into the neighbor's yard and died. It must be witchcraft. Some people refused to help chop firewood. Obviously they cursed the axe. Mary East, the sister of the executed nurse Rebecca, is such an example. She is a respected mother of 7 children, renowned for her piety. She was initially released by the court, but a few days later, after the victim girl had another episode, she was arrested again. Her second arrest determined her fate. In her last petition to the judge, Mary asked them not to let her off the hook, but to stop these lawsuits before more innocent people bled. Not long after, she was hanged. Another notable example is Sarah Good's from -old daughter, Dorothy Good. After her mother was arrested, Dorothy was interrogated and, under pressure, admitted that she was a witch. Her answer was vague and full of fear, but it was taken as the truth. She was imprisoned for 8 months in shackles. When she was finally released, her mental state broke down and she never recovered from the trauma. Pregnant women were not spared either. Elizabeth Proctor, whose husband John Proctor was later hanged, found guilty and sentenced to death. But because she was pregnant, her death sentence was postponed. This might have saved her life. She gave birth to her child in imprisonment, was eventually released after the trial, accused of having a snowball fight. Some defendants pleaded guilty in despair to avoid death and then identified others to divert their suspicion. The entire family was drawn into the maelstrom. Father, wife, daughter minus no one is out of reach. Meanwhile, the prison was overcrowded. Food is scarce. Disease transmission. Some people die while awaiting trial. Lost on the fringes of paranoid law, yet new names still join every week. In Salem, who you are no longer matters. What matters is who is willing to say your name. By the autumn of 1692, the curse of hysteria began to break. It was not because the court regained its senses, but because reality forced it to return. The turning point emerged when the accusations became overly bold. Those who once supported these experiments suddenly found themselves on the wrong side. Former Salem minister George Burroughs was arrested and accused of being the leader of the witches. He has received a good education and speaks appropriately. He had conflicts with powerful families in the village before. That's enough. But on the day he was executed, Burroughs did a shocking thing. He stood on the gallows and recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, which people thought witches couldn't do. The crowd fell silent. Some people cried. Even the most stubborn observers were shocked, but the execution continued. At that moment, the seeds of doubt were sown. Then, Mary Phipps, the wife of Governor William Phipps, filed charges. Suddenly, this hysterical mood spread to the top of the colonial social ladder. More and more criticism and chaos had made Phipps uneasy, and he eventually took action. In October 1692, he dissolved the courts of Oynt putting an end to all pending executions and trials. Public sentiment has changed. Ministers who had once been silent or colluding began to speak out loudly. King Mather was one of the most respected theologians in the colony, and he condemned the use of ghost evidence. He said that it was better for 10 suspected witches to escape than for an innocent person to be sentenced to death. In a society that has held opposing views for months, this is a radical idea. Those who once cheered for these experiments began to question them. The prison was still crowded with people, but the desire for more blood had waned. Too many respected figures have been accused. Too many innocent people have been buried. The villagers began to realize that this was not the justice of the gods. This is crazy. The confession has dried up. Some accusers have changed their tune. Others vanished from the public eye. Those who had shouted the loudest earlier now lowered their eyes. Fear has not vanished, but it has been exhausted. The public needs stability. The officials wanted to save face. And Salem, scarred and ashamed, was finally ready to wake up from the nightmare. A storm is coming, but the damage has already been done. By the end of 1692, the judicial system began to collapse under the weight of its own absurdity. With the dissolution of the Oynt and then A courts in October, a new and more cautious court, the High Judicial Court, was established in early 1693. This time it's different. Bizarre evidence was no longer permitted, and the judges were clearly skeptical of the plaintiff's nonsense. As a result, the speed of conviction dropped sharply. Many of the accused witches were directly acquitted. Of the 56 cases heard in the new court, the majority have been released. Even those who had already confessed began to withdraw their testimonies, admitting that it was fear, torture, or pressure that forced them to lie. The drama performance of the tortured girls lost its persuasiveness. The most prominent case was that of Pastor Samuel Willard, a respected pastor who was suspected. Although he has never been formally prosecuted, the fact that such a highly respected and devout person may be suspected highlights how arbitrary and corrupt this process has become. The once fierce imperial court has now become cautious. They began to quietly release those who were still in prison, first to those who lack sufficient evidence, and finally even those who admit to using witchcraft in court. Meanwhile, the families of those who were executed began to demand justice. John Proctor's children requested the return of his property. Rebecca Nas's family launched a campaign to clear her name. Over time, the shame of the community replaced its fear. The church congregation was divided. The friendship is over. The social order in Salem has fallen apart. Governor Phipps, realizing the colony's growing embarrassment internationally, pardoned the remaining prisoners in 1693, but even freedom comes at a price. Many families have to pay the prison fees themselves before being released. Imagine that you have lost your home, your health, almost your life, just paying a bill for the privilege of survival. At the end of this ordeal, 19 people were hanged, 1 was crushed to death, 5 died in prison, and more than 200 were charged. The court did not merely collapse but imploded, leaving behind a huge pit filled with guilt, sadness, and suspicion. The test has ended, but the healing has not yet begun. Salem is a village that has been forever transformed by the people it lost, the justice it abandoned, and the mirror it is now forced to examine. The gallows was silent and the prison was empty, but Salem was not at peace at all. What haunts the town is not ghosts, but a sense of guilt. At first it was just a few sick girls, but later it evolved into a collective act of destruction. Families were torn apart, reputations were ruined, and innocent lives came to an end. Now the survivors have to live in the ruins. The neighbors can no longer look each other in the eye. This group of people, who once prayed together, now point fingers at each other. Some tortured girls quietly left the town. Others faded from the public eye. A few people like N. H. M. Jr. later expressed their remorse. In 1706, she stood before the congregation and publicly apologized for her role in the trial, accusing Satan of his illusion. But for many people, the loss is beyond words. Court officials also bear their responsibilities. Judge Samuel Sewall was one of the most famous figures in the trial. He was one of the few who admitted to misconduct. In 1697, during a remarkable public confession, while he was standing in the church for worship, the priest read out his confession and a prayer for forgiveness. In this era when most people are trying to forget, this is a rare moment of accountability, but forgetting is not easy. The families of death row inmates began to demand compensation. For many years, a flood of petitions has been pouring into the Massachusetts government, demanding official pardons, property returns, and public recognition of the innocence of those who were executed. The government gradually responded. In 1711, the colony passed an act that restored the rights and reputation of some victims and provided limited economic compensation to their heirs. But even so, it is still not comprehensive enough. Some families, such as the Corey and Proctor families, were completely excluded. Rumors of witchcraft have never left New England. But in Salem, its disgrace has become part of the town's identity. This village was eventually renamed Anfos, perhaps to distance itself from its victorious past. Gallows Hill has never been officially marked. It seems that this small town not really hoped to bury the dead, but also to bury the memories of what has happened. But in the sermons, in the stories, and in the silences between former friends, memories still exist. Salem was not cursed by the witch. It is cursed by fear, pride and unrestrained power. Even after the death penalty is halted, this curse will persist for a long time. The witch trials in Salem ended more than 3 centuries ago, but their legacy still echoes, not only in textbooks and historical tours, but also in how we understand justice, fear and the vulnerability of truth. What happened in 1692 was not merely a strange collective hysteria. In the face of panic, this is the collapse of logic, compassion and legal integrity. Ordinary people, farmers, midwives and ministers have all become executioners because they are too easy to believe and too little to question. Courts, which were supposed to protect the innocent, have instead become tools of oppression. Religion has been weaponized, with testimony turned into a drama, silence turned into guilt. One of the most chilling aspects of the Salem tragedy is that it happened so quickly. A few months later, fear overcame the facts. Old grudges disguised as spiritual battles have turned into death sentences. It doesn't need demons or devils, just have confidence in them. But these trials have also brought hard -1 lessons to American society. In the following years and centuries, the Salem incident was repeatedly cited in debates on due process and civil liberties. The U.S. Constitution, written nearly a century later, explicitly prohibits measures such as factual laws and deprivation of civil rights acts, which effectively doomed Salem's defendants to failure. The principles of guaranteeing the right to legal counsel, facing the rights of the plaintiff, and the demand for specific evidence were, to a certain extent, forged from the ashes of the Gable Hill. In modern times, the term witch hunt has become a synonym for political persecution or moral panic, although people often fail to consider the true terror these words represent. In fact, Salem is not a metaphor. In this small town, people were hanged for fictitious crimes and betrayed by the system designed to protect them. Perhaps the most lasting lesson is this: uncontrolled fear can become a tyranny. When fear is legitimized by power, courts, churches and governments, it is almost unstoppable. The Salem witch trial is a cautionary tale, not just about a village going crazy, but about how easily reason can collapse when fear is given authority. The G permitting may have vanished and the courtroom has quieted down, but the warnings remain in effect. Truth is fragile. Justice does not arise automatically. Unless we remember, history has the habit of repeating itself. Fulvia was born into the Fulvia family around 83 BC. This was an elite class, but somewhat strangely, it was an ancient commoner family that had long entered the upper echelon of Roman politics. Although the Fulvi are not one of the oldest noble clans, they have produced advisors, generals and orators. Their bloodline encompasses both ambition and a penchant for destruction. Fulvia's father, Marcus Fulvius Bamba was known for his prose speeches rather than his political legacy. His nickname Bamba actually refers to his stuttering. That Fulvia, she doesn't stutter. She was born to give orders. From a very young age, Elvira was surrounded by a world of sharp Roman power. Senators and generals discussed policies at her home. Elections and betrayals are daily news. She will see that politics doesn't just play a role in forums, but in marriages, funerals, rumors and behind the scenes deals. Women in Roman elite families were regarded as quiet companions, elegant, educated and obedient. Fulvia will break all these expectations. She is wealthy, highly educated and has a wide network of contacts. She knows this. Although her early life is still vaguely recorded in history, her later behavior indicates that she was a young woman with sharp observation, high political literacy and complete fearlessness. This is not a person who is faded out of the background. She had a distinct personality and a sharp political mind. Even in the male-dominated Roman ruling space, she had the will to act. This was also an unprecedentedly unstable period. The Republic is disintegrating. Civil wars, civilian uprisings, and power struggles among generals such as Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar turned Rome into a pressure cooker. The old rules were collapsing, and Fulvia happened to come of age in the process. Fulvia will learn to take advantage of chaos instead of retreating in it. Her early life did not shape the image of a humble woman that was ideal in Rome. It has created such a woman who believes that politics is not a man's world, but a battlefield to be conquered. She later married 3 powerful men, each of whom was a radical figure in Roman history. But Fulvia will not merely marry into power. She will command the army, lead the rebellion, and become the first Roman woman to appear on a coin, not as a goddess but as herself. Rome was not yet ready to embrace Fulvia, but she was. Fulvia's first marriage was to Publius C. Aelius Pulcher, and this marriage was far from traditional. C. Aelius was no ordinary Roman nobleman. He is a populist agitator, a political arsonist, and has a strong interest in chaos, scandals and street power. For many Roman elites, he was very dangerous. To the public, he is a hero. For Fulvia, it is a strategic opportunity. They got married at some point in the early 1952 BC, combining Fulvia with the man who had turned the Roman Republic into his personal stage. C. Aelius is notorious for his dramatic contempt for tradition. He once disguised himself as a woman and sneaked into a sacred religious ceremony in Caesar's home that was attended only by women. This graceful behavior seems to only enhance his reputation. Later, he gave up his noble status and ran for the position of commoner tribune, which granted him the veto power over the Senate. C. Aelius knew Rome's street politics better than most people, and Elvira was far from being a passive spouse. She was right by his side. She is not a silent partner. Roman records show that Fulvia was actively involved in her husband's political world. She reached out to his supporters, appeared at his campaign events, and managed their families as the center of Clay's politics. Together they represent a new type of Roman power couple, bold, approachable, and aggressive. But this alliance comes at a price. In 52 BC, Claus was killed by the bodyguards of his political rival Titus, and Asmilo on his way to Aean. His death shook the whole of Rome, but Elvira did not mourn in silence. She held a political funeral, which historians still talk about to this day. She paraded C. Aelius in complete body through the Roman square, exposing the bleeding wounds to achieve the best effect. The public was shocked and angry. Riots broke out. The House of Representatives and the Senate were razed to the ground. Fulvia turned his personal grief into a public uprising. This was her first major political move and it worked. She was capable of manipulating public sentiment, using spectacle as a strategy and her husband's inheritance as a weapon, which made her a new type of player in Roman politics. C. Aelius left, but Fulvia emerged from the shadow, and Rome would never look at her in the same way again. Elvira was not immersed in grief. In Rome, the shelf life of political capital was very short, and she knew this better than anyone else. Shortly after C. Aelius Pulcher's death, she got married for the second time. This time it was Gus Arbonius Gerlio, a rising political star and one of the most passionate supporters of Julius Caesar. On the surface, curiosity doesn't seem quite suitable. He has a pretentious reputation and a taste for drama, but behind his bluffing lies a sharp political manipulator. As a commoner tribune in 50 BC, Go Rio exerted tremendous influence during one of the most tumultuous periods in Rome. The Republic wavered between war and peace, Caesar's ambition and the resistance of the Senate. Fulvia saw in Carrion not merely a husband, but a bridge leading to the next district of power. This is not a romantic backlash. This is a well-considered alliance. C. Elias is left, and Fulvian aids a new political pillar. She can inherit the populist legacy established by her first husband and have the support of Caesar. Antiques meet both of these requirements. Through him, Fulvia was closely integrated into the constantly changing power dynamics of Rome. She not only married into this movement, but also helped shape it. Fulvia ensured that C. Elias supporters remained active, reshaped their cause under Curia's leadership, and maintained political participation of the city's people. But the Roman world was collapsing rapidly. The tension between Caesar and Pompey erupted into a civil war. Rio threw himself into the battle and stood by Caesar's side. Fulvia continues to be involved in politics, as always. It is reported that she helped organize support and manage resources for her husband's election campaign. 49 BC. Rio led a military expedition to Africa to ensure Caesar's position. But it was a disaster. He was ambushed and killed by the army of King Juba of Numidia. He died cruelly and his entire army was wiped out. Fulvia became a widow once again. Rome once again waited to see if she would disappear into the background. She didn't. Rio's death merely consolidated her status as a political widow, and she had a dangerous resilience. During the civil unrest in Rome, she lost two husbands, both of whom were fighting for the cause of populism. But Fulvia is far from complete. Her boldest collaboration and most dramatic chapter are yet to come. Fulvia's third marriage, and the most famous one, was to Mark Antony, an ambitious general and a loyal ally of Julius Caesar. Their union was formed around 47 BC. This is not merely a romantic attachment. This is a consolidation of power. That Elvira has proven himself to be a master of street politics in Rome. Antony's rapid rise in both military and political affairs required such astute support from Rome. They together formed one of the most politically influential couples in the later period of the Republic. By the time they got married, Fulvia had become accustomed to blood and betrayal. She buried two husbands and defeated countless enemies by stratagems. Antony is no stranger to scandals either. He was addicted to alcohol and gambling, and his personal life was notoriously chaotic. But with Fulvia, he found someone who could do more than just entertain him. She can safeguard his interests, unite his alliance and gather supporters when he goes out to campaign. Although Antony appears arrogant on the outside, he understands her worth. He allowed Fulvia to exercise power, a power that Roman women had never publicly exercised. She opened his letter. While he was away, she gave the order. She attended the meeting as an observer, which affected the date. Most of the materials about Rome are hostile, depicting her as a domineering and power-hungry person. But what disturbed them the most was not her ambition. Rather, she behaved like a Roman man in a world where there was no language suitable for such a woman. After Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, the Republic once again fell into chaos. Antony was eager to retain his position as Caesar's political successor, but it was Elvira who truly controlled Rome. When Antony formed a second triad with Octavian and Leap, Elvira, as his representative in the capital, managed the sponsorship network, coordinated with street gangs, and ensured that Antony's supporters remained mobilized. She even helped arrange a formal reconciliation between Antony and Octavian, marrying her alter to him. This alliance later broke down. In public, Elvira is not only Antony's wife, but also his agent. The coins minted in Rome were engraved with Antony's portrait and her name, which was an unprecedented recognition of her status. She didn't hide in the shadow of power. She stood in the dazzling sunlight. But in Rome, power was always borrowed, and Fulvia was about to test how far a woman could go before Rome collapsed. When Mark Antony was conducting military operations and political transactions in the Roman world, it was Fulvia who controlled the streets of Rome. She is not merely his wife, she was actually his regent. During a period when violence, bribery and brutality affected maintaining order, Fulvia proved that she could get along as well if not better, with any man in the Senate. After Caesar's assassination, Rome was a battlefield without swords. Power has become a moving target. Fulvia understood this. She became Antony's political substitute and consolidated his authority in the capital. She commanded her allies, dealt with ardent civilians, negotiated with factions, and the boldest thing was to wage war with words and money. She provided funds for the loyal army, bribed to maintain public order, and ensured that any legislation passed would benefit Antony's future. Some ancient sources, especially those hostile figures like Aaron and Dionysius, depict Fulvia as a manipulative, ruffian and even warlike person. But behind this misogynistic exaggeration lies a woman who actively participates in politics. And this world has no regulations for women, except weaving and mourning. Fulvia is forming alliances, supporting military commanders, and even promulgating decrees, functions that are usually reserved by the Senate and the Parliament. She also made public appearances and maintained close ties with veterans, who were a politically crucial group in the later power struggles of the Republic. When Antony was fighting in the East, Fulvia was often his authoritative figure in Italy, meeting the centurion, influencing the decision on land distribution, and reminding the soldiers that their loyalty to Antony was rewarded. But the accumulation of such power comes at a cost. The Roman nobility, especially the faction allied with Octavian, the successor of Caesar, and the increasingly fierce rivals of Antony, detested the influence of Fulvia. They thought she was a meddlesome woman who had too much influence on the legion, the law and loyalty. Her ability to act without male supervision is not only threatening but also unprecedented. Fulvia is not naive. She knew that the relationship between Antony and Octavian was becoming increasingly tense. She could see that their alliance was breaking up, and she understood something that neither of them seemed to have fully grasped yet. The Republic is not large enough to accommodate the two of them. So Fulvia began to prepare for the next stage. It's not diplomatic means, but confrontation. She has stood behind power long enough. Now, she is ready to take it into her own hands. In 41 BC, Fulvia did an incredible thing. She went to war with the future Augustus Octavian, and she didn't do it calmly. Her husband Mark Antony was still stationed in the east, and Fulvia, along with Antony's brother and consul Lucius Antony, challenged Octavian's authority in Italy. Is there a reason? On surface, this was to safeguard Antony's interests and protect the land rights of the Roman veterans loyal to him. But behind all this, Fulvia's fingerprints are everywhere. This is not merely a political issue. This was a military rebellion led by Roman women. This was the first and only time in Roman history that a civil war was initiated and organized by women. The conflict, known as the Perusni War, was triggered by Octavian's controversial land redistribution plan, which displaced many Italians to reward his soldiers. Fulvia seized on the growing discontent and depicted Octavian as a tyrant and a traitor to Caesar's legacy. Lucius served as her frontline figure in the Senate, while Fulvia organized behind the scenes. They gathered 8 legions and captured the city of Peruna, which is today's Peru. Don't get it wrong, this is the war in Fulvia. Ancient records show that she was more engaged in this conflict than Lucius himself. She summoned the army, incited the public, and even corresponded with the generals. Rumors about her commanding the legions were everywhere in Rome. She issued orders, forcing Lucius into a confrontation he did not want. Although Octavian was very surprised, he still took prompt action. He besieged Peru in the winter of 4140 BC. The supply was cut off, causing the city to submit. Fulvia, caught between dwindling food and political betrayal, watched as her old gamble found. At the beginning of 40,000 BC, this city surrendered. Lucius Antony remained, perhaps to avoid alienating Antony, but Fulvia was exiled. This woman, who once commanded riots, marriage, the military and public opinion, is now regarded as too dangerous for the Roman territory. She was sent to Sicyon in Greece, hoping to be reunited with Antony there. But Antony didn't run over. The once powerful alliance between husband and wife was eroded in the fog of war and distance. Fulvia acted in his name, but perhaps did not receive his blessing. She dared to do what no Roman woman had ever done before and launched a civil war. Now the Republic has paid her the price. After being expelled from Rome, Fulvia ended in Siken, a Greek city that had become a diplomatic purgatory for failed power players. She went to war not for personal gain but for her husband. She believed that she was defending Mark Antony's interests, his honor, and perhaps their shared vision for Rome. But what awaited her in exile was not a heroic welcome. Silence. Fulvia took all the risks. Her status, her allies, her life. However, Anthony didn't rush to see her immediately. In fact, when Fulvia arrived in Greece, Antony was already entangled with Cleopatra. Whether the romantic relationship has already begun or is merely brewing, the symbolic significance is simply incredible. While Fulvia was gathering his legions, Anthony raised his goblet together with the queen at the banquet. This kind of betrayal has had a profound impact not only on individuals, but also on politics. Fulvia went to war to protect Anthony's power in Italy. In response, Anthony left her to fend for herself. Some ancient historians, especially Plutarch, believe that Antony was angry that she launched the Piraeus, a war without his direct consent. Others, however, think that he welcomes her resignation. This cleared the way for a marriage alliance with Octavian, which Fulvia could never tolerate. However, Fulvia is not without supporters at all. Some of Antony's troops, who were very loyal to her, urged reconciliation, but her health condition began to deteriorate. After experiencing siege, exile and betrayal, Fulvia died in Siken in 40 BC. It might be due to illness, stress, heartbreak, or a combination of all three. She's about 43 years old. Her death provided Anthony with a clean political exit. Not long after, he met Octavian and agreed to marry Octavian's sister Octavian as part of the renewal of the peace treaty. The big three have temporarily united again, but only because Fulvia N., a woman who dared to challenge their designs, has left. Fulvia's legacy was soon overshadowed by Cleopatra, whose myth was almost the myth of all Roman women of that period. But there is no doubt that Fulvia is the prototype. She did not manipulate power behind the scenes. She entered this world, stood at the center, and dared to command the army in a world that regarded women as furniture. Rome did not know what to do with her, so he erased her. The embers of her rebellion will linger on, and her story is far from ordinary. After Fulvia's death in 40 BC, though she had manipulated Antony, Octavian, and even her former allies, began to quietly rewrite her legacy. She couldn't defend herself, so the story was shaped by her enemies and the restless survivors of her ambition. Just like many powerful women in history, Fulvia became a scapegoat. Ancient materials, mostly written by people with vested interests, depicted her as the cause of the Peruvian War. The rift between Anthony and Octavian was even the chaos of the Republic. Aeon, Dionysius and Plutarch depicted her as a domineering, jealous and power-driven person. They accused her of dragging Lucius Antony into conflict, opposing Octavian, and even leading to Antony's eventual estrangement from Rome. But are these accusations fair? Hardly any. Fulvia operates in a political atmosphere of violence and manipulation, at least if you are a man. She was no more ambitious than Caesar, no more aggressive than Pompey, and no more ruthless than Octavian. The only real deviation of hers was that she was a woman who acted like a Roman man. Then the Romans did not know how to digest this. She was not confined at home, quietly knitting, nor did she become a political ornament. She wrote to the generals, organized street thugs and demanded the loyalty of the army. This made her very dangerous, not only for Octavian but also for history itself. Even Mark Antony minus the legacy of the man she's been striving to preserve minus casually blamed the civil war on Fulvia. After reconciling with Octavian and marrying his sister, Antony used Fulvia's death to carry out diplomatic purging. Her memory became the price for his political survival. There was no monument erected for her, no grand funeral, no mourning speech in the Senate, only silence. However, her enemies were unable to completely eliminate her. Fulvia has done too much. She has summoned troops, manipulated elections, negotiated alliances and fought civil wars. She was the first Roman woman whose name appeared on a coin, not as a deity or metaphor, but as a political representative. The damage to her reputation was intentional, but her presence in the historical records was also intentional. Despite people's attempts to bury her with comics and slander, Fulvia refused to disappear. Her resistance still echoes. You just need to listen beyond those people. Fulvia's story ended in silence, but the legacy she left behind was by no means silence. In the centuries following her death, historians and writers have been striving to place her within the grand narrative of Rome, as Fulvia broke every rule that should have been held by Roman women. Not only did she suggest gaining power from the shadows, but she herself also became power, which made her unforgettable and deeply disturbed this patriarchal world. In a society where women are expected to exert influence through whispers and marriage, Fulvia cries out from policy, war and the political stage. She is not a spouse. She is a commander. However, people remember her more for her resistance than for her achievements. Roman historians were unable to deal with an unruly woman, so they rewrote her as a sharp, power-hungry and disruptive one. But from the lines between the words, one can discern a different character. Fulvia was the first Roman woman to mint coins in her own name. She organized political factions, used marriage as a tactical weapon, and manipulated street politics in Rome with astonishing efficiency. During the civil war in the 1st century BC, she was not a bystander but a participant. Her influence frightened the senators and shaped the fates of the Big Three. Her downfall was not due to incompetence. This is due to time and gender. If she had been born male, people might have remembered her as the second Caesar or a more charming Cato. On the contrary, she was portrayed as an evil woman who dared to take risks. Despite this, her legacy still lingers quietly. Later Roman women, such as Livia Drusilla, Grain the Younger, and even Cleopatra herself, although living in a different world, all operated under the shadow of Fulvia's assistance in carving. They would manipulate the emperor, the army and the right of succession. But Fulvia was the first to do so, and she had no imperial title to protect her. Today, modern historians are beginning to examine Fulvia with a fresh perspective. She is no longer a cautionary tale, but is widely recognized as one of the most politically active women in Roman history. She challenged the boundaries of women's power and paid the price for it. She not only lives in the era of the Big Three, but also challenges them. Although Rome may have tried to erase her, Fulvia has left fingerprints in every corner of its collapse. It's not a footnote, but power. A woman who is several centuries ahead of her time. By the summer of 1963, the United States was a country wavering between two worlds. One is rooted in the oppressive system that has lasted for centuries, and the other yearns for free breathing. In the Deep South, racial segregation was not merely a social norm. This is the law. African Americans are prohibited from entering restaurants, schools, buses, polling stations, and even water dispensers. Police brutality is rampant. Lynchings still occur from time to time. In places like Birmingham, Alabama, peaceful protesters are confronted with roaring police dogs and high pressure fire hoses. But change is coming and it doesn't require permission. In just a few years, the civil rights movement has become the focus of national attention. Sit-ins, free rides and boycotts have become familiar headlines. Leaders like Rosa Parks, Meg Evers and John Lewis are no longer just names. They are symbols of resistance. The march in Washington was not caused by a single conversation. This is the result of growing frustration and intense hope. African Americans are no longer content with waiting. They demand civil rights and are determined to have their voices heard in the most important place minus the capital of the United States. The idea of holding large scale demonstrations in Washington has been around for decades. The concept was first proposed by labor organizer and long civil rights advocate Philip Randolph in the 1940s. At that time, this was to force the Roosevelt administration to abolish racial segregation in the defense industry. The protest was cancelled after Roosevelt gave an unsigned the executive order. But now it's 1963, and the stakes are even higher. Randolph, along with other civil rights leaders, including B.R. Drafty and Martin Luther King, revived this vision. This time, they were not marching just for work. They marched for dignity, for the right to vote, for the abolition of racial segregation in schools, for equal pay for equal work, and most importantly, for the basic human right without fear. Despite many differences, more than a dozen major civil rights organizations still came together to plan this event because they understood the power of the united front. The countdown has already begun. Buses are being organized. Flyers were distributed everywhere. Word of mouth spreads even faster than newspapers. Across the country, African Americans are preparing for one of the most memorable moments in American history. The dream is taking shape step by step. Any form of protest in Washington, D.C. is no small matter, but planning an event with over 100,000 people, or even more, is crazy. Logically speaking, this sounds like a nightmare. Food, water, transportation, sound system, bathroom, medical team, permit, crowd control, safety plan. But they still succeeded. In this controlled chaos, standing at the center is Baird Rustin. Although he is an openly gay and often hides behind the scenes for political reasons, he is a strategic master. Rustin once studied non-violence directly under the guidance of followers of Mahatma Gandhi in India. He was paraded, imprisoned, beaten and monitored by the FBI, but nothing could stop him. He regarded the march in Washington as an opportunity to show the world what could be achieved through disciplined, non-violent protests with precise military coordination. In just 8 weeks, Rustin and his team turned this idea into reality. The official name of this march was March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and it was deliberately designed to include both racial justice and economic opportunities. This dual information is no accident, and Dr. King later became a spiritual symbol of that time. Randolph Rustin ensured that these requirements covered not only civil rights, but also unemployment, the minimum wage and workers' rights. Meanwhile, tensions are brewing beneath the surface. President John F. Kennedy and the BBB were both very nervous, extremely nervous. They are worried about riots, backlash and, even worse, bloodshed. Civil rights leaders assured them that the protest would be peaceful. However, the National Guard remains on standby. Hospitals in Washington, D.C. were on alert and the sale of alcohol was banned that day. Federal workers were even told that they could stay at home. Then comes the issue of unity. The 6 major civil rights organizations minus the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the National City Union, and the Randolph Sleep Porter Brotherhood, Linus often clash strategically. Some people hope to take more radical actions, while others hope to adopt more diplomatic means. The 5 young brands of NCC are becoming increasingly impatient with Gold's non-violent approach, but they all agree on this. The silent time passed. Rustin's plan sounds like a military operation. Every bus and train was being tracked. The speaking time of each speaker is accurate to the minute. There are bailiffs on each route who have received crowd control training. They are not just planning a parade. They meticulously planned a moment that would shake the conscience of the entire nation. August 28, 1963. A sweltering Wednesday in Washington, D.C. at 9 and the sun was already very hot, and the dampness stuck to the skin like a second shirt. But this did not stop them. They come from every corner of this country. Black people, white people, young people, old people, students, clergy, factory workers and celebrities. Some people were dressed in their best clothes, while others were holding protest signs. They come by bus, train, carpool, or even on foot. More than 250,000 people gathered at the National Mall like a wave of hope. However, there was no chaos. Despite the government's concerns about riots and unrest, the scene was surprisingly calm. Volunteers are responsible for directing the flow of people. The Red Cross distributes water. When the new marchers arrived, the groups sang freedom songs, held hands and chewed. Near the reflecting pool, you can hear the singing of the gospel choir, and on the marble columns of the Lincoln Memorial, songs of praise for work and freedom echo. Celebrities also joined in. Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, Paul Newman, Marlon Brando, Joan Bates, Bob Dylan, but no one came to ask for an autograph. There they witnessed history and made their voices heard for a cause more important than anyone else. The crowd was orderly but energetic. No shoving, no robbery, no violence. On the contrary, everyone believes that this is not merely a protest. This is a sacred moment. For many African Americans, merely standing in the square is like a silent revolution. To be seen, to be valued, to be able to say that we are now standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, where the great liberators once sat on the stone tablet. This is the cycle of several generations. At exactly noon, the official program began. Leaders representing different organizations, ideologies and regions took the stage one after another, but the message they conveyed was consistent. The speaker called for equal pay for equal work, the abolition of racial segregation in schools, a minimum living wage and an end to police brutality, performed by Maria Jackson. Marian Anderson was once banned from singing in the Constitution Hall for racial reasons, but now she sings for thousands of people under the open sky. As time went by, the tense atmosphere grew stronger and stronger, not because of unease, but because of anticipation. The person everyone was waiting for hasn't spoken yet. When he does this, the world will stop, listen and remember. This parade not only made history, it became a legend second by second. By about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the crowd quieted down. It's not because they are tired, but because they know what will happen next. Standing in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial, Martin Luther King approached the podium. He was dressed in a dark suit and wore an neatly tied tie. His composed expression could hardly hide the anger in his heart. A night before, he carried the speech he had prepared in advance and typed and wrote together with the advisers. But what the world remembers is not the printed content. This was his voice from the bottom of his heart. He began with moderate intensity, outlining the harsh realities of apartheid, police violence and breaking promises. 100 years later, when he referred to the Emancipation Proclamation, he said, "Black people still have no freedom." His voice rose and fell as if he were preaching. He uses repetition, rhythm and silence not as fillers but as tools. The crowd listened attentively. Some nodded, some wiped their tears, and others held up signs that only read now. But what happened next changed the tone of the entire event, and it could also be said that it altered the course of the civil rights movement itself. Standing behind King was the gospel legend Maria Jackson, who had sung a song earlier that day. She suddenly shouted, "Tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about your dream." Ken made it. He put his nets aside, grabbed the podium and began a speech he had given before, but had never done it like this. "I have a dream," he said, as the crowd moved closer. "I dream that one day this country will rise up and fulfill the true meaning of its founding creed." Every sentence sounds louder, clearer and more resolute. "I dream of the day when the sons of former slaves and those of former slave owners can sit at the same table as brothers and sisters. I dream that one day my children will live in a country where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the quality of their character." This is no longer a speech. This is a vision, a prayer, a lightning bolt that pierces through history. In the end, Jin said, "Finally, I'm free. Finally free. Thank the Almighty God. We are finally free." The crowd erupted, with applause, tears and cheers. They knew that what they had just witnessed was not merely an attempt. They heard the prophecy. The power of the Washington March is not only reflected in the speeches and music. It exists among the people. The scale of the crowd gathered that day was astonishing. They come from Mississippi, Michigan, Alabama, New York, California and anywhere in between. Some of them are experienced activists who have participated in more than 10 parades before. There are still some people who have not left their hometowns until now. They packed lunch, took a bus ride for either 20 hours, and slept in church clothes just to get there. Many people are ordinary people, maids, teachers, steel workers, and postal clerks. They do not see themselves as political figures, but as witnesses. They don't just want to change, they are change. There were also children in the crowd. A young black girl with a ribbon tied in her hair. A boy holding a hand-drawn sign. Parents carried their toddlers on their shoulders, so that they could see the Lincoln Memorial in the distance and hear the sounds coming from the loudspeakers. For them, this is more than just an event. This is the beginning at a new world. Some faces are very conspicuous. There is a young John Lewis, only 23 years old, representing the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee SNCC. His initial speech was so intense and uncompromising that senior leaders asked him to calm down just a few minutes before he took the stage. He reluctantly agreed. His call for radical change still shakes the crowd. Then came Daisy Bates, the only woman to speak that day, not on her own but on behalf of other civil rights women, who read out a prepared statement. The organizers were once criticized for ignoring women's voices. Bates' brief but powerful message emphasized a cruel reality. Even in the movement for equality, some voices remain hard to be heard. Also present were the union organizers, rabbis, nuns, pastors and students from various backgrounds. They are not in agreement strategically. Some people support Martin Luther King's non-violence. Others, however, tend to favor Malcolm X's more radical stance. But on that very day, none of these differences mattered anymore. Unity won victory. This is a visual symphony that showcases the possibilities of America. The hands of the white and the black were united. A sound of 250,000 souls breathing together with the button that says "Be free" now pinned to their chests. The faces in the crowd are not merely watching the unfolding of history. They are shaping it. No one will forget what they have seen. When the world saw unity, inspiration and poetic justice on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, the march in Washington was by no means simple. The seemingly perfectly synchronized movements were actually held together by ropes, sweat and many last-minute compromises. The chief designer of the parade, Bayard Rustin, had to fight not only with logistics, but also with politics. He has been under close scrutiny, not only because he is openly gay and a former communist, but also because some civil rights leaders are worried that his identity will be used to defame the movement. In fact, Congressman Adam Clayton Powell once threatened that if King did not allow Rustin to withdraw from the early campaign, he would publicly accuse Rustin and drive King of being in a relationship. This threat plagues every stage of the plan. Then, there is the issue of women's voices. Although women like Ella Baker, Diane Nash and Dorothy Hyde played key roles, no one was invited to deliver important speeches alone. That day, Rosa Parks was also in the crowd, respected by everyone, but she didn't get the microphone. Behind the powerful visuals of the parade lies the truth. The movement is still struggling with its own hierarchy and blind spots. Even within the 6 major institutions, frictions keep emerging. The leaders of SNCC are increasingly disappointed with the slow pace of change and the older generation's insistence on moderation. They hope to fight systemic racism more actively. CORE has also encountered similar setbacks, but unity is considered too important. Meanwhile, the federal government gritted its teeth. Under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI dispatched over 100 agents to monitor the organizers. They installed eavesdroppers in hotel rooms, tracked key figures and compiled investigation reports. They were convinced that the march would turn violent or that the Communist Party would hijack the event. When such incidents did not occur, they merely intensified their surveillance efforts, especially on Dr. King. Don't forget the money. This march cost $250,000, which is equivalent to several $1,000,000 today. Most of them were raised through trade unions and compassionate donors, but the organizers kept working until the last minute. They even borrowed walkie-talkies from the Boy Scouts. The march in Washington was historic, yes, but it was also profoundly humanistic, imperfect, chaotic, political and unfinished. Just like this country, it is also seeking a cure. As the crowd gradually dispersed, the sun began to set behind the Washington Monument. People hugged, wept, sang and stayed as low as possible, unwilling to leave this sacred land. That the parade ended, the speech has been delivered. The slogan was hung high. The whole world is paying attention. Now, this question hangs heavily in the damp air of August. What will happen next? In the following days, the media's response was cautiously positive. All major newspapers have acknowledged the historical nature of this event, although often with a tone of detached curiosity. Some people say it is orderly and dignified, which is a secret code that no one is disturbing. Few media outlets gave sufficient room to the specific demands of the march, such as the federal employment program ORA to -year minimum wage equivalent to around $20 today. But everyone was paying attention to Drive King's speech. This is at least not to be ignored. President John F. Kennedy, who initially opposed the march, saw it unfold on TV and grew increasingly impressed, perhaps even somewhat surprised. He described the incident as impressive and immediately met with civil rights leaders at the White House, but legislative action remains slow. A civil rights bill he proposed is still blocked in Congress due to the restrictions of the Southern Opposition Clause. Some activists are disappointed about this. They had hoped that this march would lead to immediate action. On the contrary, they returned to hard work, organizing marching, resisting and mourning those who paid the price for justice. Just a few weeks later, reality dealt me a heavy blow. On September 15, 1963, 4 black girls were killed in the explosion at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. Yes, the dream has ended, but the nightmare is not. However, things did change. The march in Washington marked a new stage for the civil rights movement. It proves that large minor-scale protests, to be disciplined, powerful and negligible, it unites a broader alliance than ever before. Unions, religious leaders, celebrities, students and the American working class, all are in one place, just as united together. Most importantly, it gives the movement a sound, a dream, a speech that is quoted, studied and decoded all over the world. The march has come to an end, but this journey has only just begun. Its path will soon be achieved through bloodshed, legislation and reform. The march in Washington not only touched the conscience of the Americans, it reshaped the moral landscape of the United States. The initial bold protests became the cornerstone of the civil rights movement's legacy, permanently altering Americans' understanding of justice, democracy, and the power of collective action. From a legislative perspective, this march did not bring about an immediate victory, but it created momentum. Less than a year later, in July 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. It prohibits racial segregation in public places and employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, gender, or nationality. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act followed closely, hitting the core of the Jim Crow Act. Would these bills have been passed without the march? Maybe. But will they have the same moral power and the same undeniable public pressure? Probably not. For Martin Luther King, that day's speech pushed him to a new level. He transformed from a respected leader to a global icon. But what followed were costs, surveillance, threats, and finally the assassination in 1968. As time goes by, the dreams he tells of on the steps will become more bitter, more tragic and more inspiring. For the broader movement, this march demonstrated what unity can achieve. It provided the organizers with a blueprint for large minor-scale mobilization and inspired a generation of activists in the United States and abroad. Anti-apartheid organizers in South Africa, student protesters in Europe and future human rights leaders around the world all took the Washington March as an example. But this is not merely a historical heritage. The language of the march, the ideas of work and freedom, the image of peaceful resistance, and the echo of "I Have a Dream" still reverberate in modern protests. From the Million March to the Black Lives Matter rally, the echoes of 1963 echoed on every slogan and every piece of cardboard in Washington, D.C. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial now stands opposite the tidal basin of the Lincoln Memorial. Tourists walk past his towering stone statue, on which the words of that day in August are engraved, that a true monument is not carved in stone. In the classroom, at the polling station, during the parade, in the voices that refuse to remain silent. For this dream should not linger in history books. It means life. The legacy left by that summer afternoon still gives us the courage to do so to this day. More than 60 years have passed. That summer afternoon, over 250,000 people stood side by side in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial. The March on Washington has gone down in history in textbooks, documentaries and museum exhibitions. Dr. Jin's speech was taught at the school. His steady and powerful voice reverberated in the memory of the people like a sacred chorus. But for many people, the question remains, has the dream come true, or has it merely been postponed? In some respects, progress is undeniable. The legal framework of racial segregation was dismantled. Although the right to vote is now under new attack in many states, it was won through bloodshed, demonstrations, and court battles. In 1963, it was unimaginable for black congressmen, judges, mayors, and even to serve 2 consecutive terms as the President of the United States. Interracial marriage was once illegal in most parts of the United States, but it is now protected by federal law. None of these are trivial matters. These victories were created through unremitting struggle. However, the initial demands of the march, those often overshadowed by Martin Luther King's speeches, remain unresolved. The call for a minimum living wage remains unmet. Racial disparities in education, housing, employment, and healthcare remained deeply rooted. It was the police brutality that sparked many early civil rights organizations, and now it is still provoking anger and protests. In a country where opportunities are not determined by postal codes or skin color, the dream of achieving true economic justice is still far from being realized. Modern movements like Black Lives Matter have taken over the mantle, often using the imagery and rhetoric of the 1963 march as inspiration and condemnation. They marched in the same city, sang on the same streets, and demanded the same basic human rights. But they do so in a world that has been transformed by social media, surveillance, and new forms of resistance. The march in Washington was never the end. This is a tipping point, a foothold, indicating this is us. This is what we demand. This is a declaration, not a resolution. Therefore, this dream is still being hit, challenged, and reinterpreted, but it is still alive. Whether it will be postponed, distorted, or realized one day does not depend on the past, but on us. The choices we make, the injustices we face, and the courage we have to move forward time and again, until our dreams become a common reality of life.